Robert E. Lee is often remembered as one of the most brilliant commanders ever to take the field. His campaigns are studied, his maneuvers admired, and his ability to win against larger armies still feels almost unbelievable. For much of the Civil War, he seemed untouchable. So the question lingers, almost uncomfortably. If Lee was such a genius, why did he lose? To answer that, you have to step away from the legend and look at the reality of the war he was fighting. Because Lee didn't lose in a single moment. He lost slowly, over time, in a way that had less to do with mistakes and more to do with the kind of war the Civil War had become. For 3 years, Lee dominated the Eastern Theater. Against Union generals like McClellan, Burnside, and Hooker, he created a pattern that seemed almost unbreakable. They would march south with superior numbers, they would hesitate, they would fight cautiously, and then, when things didn't go perfectly, they would retreat. Lee learned to expect this.
At Fredericksburg, he positioned his army behind strong defenses and watched as Union forces attacked uphill into devastating fire. At Chancellorsville, he took one of the biggest risks of the war, splitting his already smaller army and launched a surprise attack that shattered a much larger opponent. These weren't just victories, they were psychological blows. Lee didn't just defeat armies, he defeated confidence. Union generals began to second-guess themselves before the battle even began. They hesitated, they overestimated Lee, and in war, hesitation can be as deadly as any bullet. But beneath those victories was a quiet truth. Lee was not destroying the Union army. He was pushing it back, hurting it, discouraging it, but not ending it. And that mattered more than anyone realized at the time. The Confederacy's strategy was never about conquering the North. It was about survival. If the South could hold out long enough, it believed the North would grow tired of the war. Elections would come, public opinion would shift, political pressure would build.
If the North chose to stop fighting, the Confederacy wouldn't need to win militarily. It would win by endurance. Lee understood this. His entire approach was built around it. He would fight defensively, inflict heavy casualties, and stretch the war out as long as possible. For a while, it worked. But then, in 1864, everything changed. When Ulysses S. Grant was brought east and given command of all Union armies, he brought with him a completely different mindset. Grant didn't see war as a series of individual battles to be won or lost. He saw it as a continuous process, a system that could be broken if enough pressure was applied. Where others hesitated, Grant pressed forward. Where others paused, Grant continued. Where others retreated, Grant advanced. This difference became clear almost immediately. In May 1864, Grant crossed the Rapidan River and moved into Virginia. The campaign that followed, the Overland Campaign, would become one of the most brutal stretches of fighting in American history.
The first major clash came in the wilderness. It was chaos. Dense forest, smoke, confusion, and fire turned the battlefield into something closer to a nightmare than a traditional engagement. Soldiers couldn't see more than a few yards ahead. Units lost cohesion. Fire swept through the brush, burning wounded men alive. When it ended, Union casualties were staggering. By every previous standard, this was the moment to retreat. Lee expected it. His officers expected it. Even Grant's own soldiers expected it. But Grant didn't retreat. He turned south. That single decision changed everything. For the first time, Lee was facing an opponent who would not step back after a bloody fight. The familiar rhythm of the war, the pattern Lee had come to rely on, was broken. And once that pattern was gone, Lee's advantage began to disappear with it. Over the next several weeks, the two armies collided again and again. At Spotsylvania Courthouse, the fighting reached levels of intensity that are still hard to comprehend. At the Bloody Angle, soldiers fought for hours in mud and rain, sometimes at such close range that they stabbed through gaps in wooden defenses. Bodies piled up so densely that the dead and wounded formed part of the battlefield itself.
Grant took heavy losses. Lee held his ground. But then, Grant moved again, at North Anna, at Cold Harbor, At every turn, the same pattern repeated. Lee would take a strong defensive position, Grant would attack, the Union would suffer, and then, instead of withdrawing, Grant would shift his army and force another battle. This was not how Lee had learned to fight. Lee excelled at maneuver warfare, finding the right moment, the right position, the right opportunity to strike. But Grant wasn't giving him that kind of war anymore. Grant was forcing a continuous, grinding struggle where there was no pause, no reset, no recovery. And that was the key. The Civil War had become something new. It was no longer just about tactics or leadership on the battlefield. It was about production, manpower, logistics, and endurance. It was about which side could keep going longer. In that kind of war, the numbers mattered.
The North had more people, far more. It had factories producing weapons and supplies on an industrial scale. It had railroads to move those supplies quickly. It had the ability to replace its losses. The South did not. Every soldier Lee lost was harder to replace. Every weapon, every horse, every supply was more difficult to recover. His army was not just fighting, it was slowly shrinking. Grant understood this clearly. He wasn't trying to win a perfect victory. He was trying to make sure Lee couldn't keep fighting. By the time the campaign reached Petersburg, the nature of the war had shifted again. The open battles gave way to trenches, fortifications, and a long siege. It stretched on for months, draining the Confederacy's strength little by little. This was the kind of war Lee could not win. He could defend, he could maneuver, he could outthink his opponent, but he could not create soldiers, supplies, or time out of nothing.
And there was another factor, one that is often overlooked. Lee himself was aging and worn down. Years of constant command, stress, and physical strain had taken their toll. He suffered from health issues, including heart problems. There were moments during the campaign when he tried to lead charges personally, as if his presence alone could change the outcome. His officers had to stop him. That tells you something about the pressure he was under. For the first time in the war, he was not dictating events, he was reacting to them. And that shift, from control to response, was the beginning of the end. By early 1865, the situation had become desperate. Lee's army was running out of men. Desertion was increasing. Supplies were scarce. The Confederacy itself was collapsing under the weight of the war. When Grant finally broke through at Petersburg, Lee had no real options left. He retreated, hoping to escape, regroup, or continue the fight somewhere else. But Grant didn't let him. He pursued relentlessly. There was no pause, no chance to recover, no opportunity to rebuild. At Appomattox Courthouse, Lee surrendered. So why did Lee lose? Not because he wasn't brilliant, not because he made one catastrophic error, not because he lacked courage or leadership. He lost because the war changed, and the new kind of war demanded something different. Lee was a master of battles. Grant was a master of war. Lee fought with precision, timing, and boldness. Grant fought with pressure, endurance, and inevitability. Lee tried to win in moments. Grant won over time. And in the end, that is what decided everything. Because wars are not always won by the most brilliant commander on the field. Sometimes they are won by the one who understands what kind of war is being fought and is willing to fight it to its conclusion. Lee was a genius, but Grant understood the future. And that is why Lee lost.